had been planning the trip for months. A long solo hike through the backcountry of Colorado. Nothing too extreme, just 3 days out in the wilderness, following a well-worn trail through valleys and over ridges, away from the noise of the city. I'd done hikes like this before, but this time, I wanted to push myself, go further than I ever had. Camp deeper in the wild, away from the crowded campgrounds. Just me, the mountains, and the sound of the wind through the trees. The first day went smoothly. I parked my truck at the trailhead, double-checked my gear, and set out in the early morning. The air was crisp, the sky a bright, endless blue. The first few miles wound through pine forests, the smell of damp earth and pine needles filling the air. I passed a couple of other hikers heading the opposite direction, exchanged quick nods and small smiles, but otherwise, I was alone, exactly how I wanted it. By midday, I reached a clearing near a small lake. I stopped for lunch, sitting on a fallen log as I watched dragonflies dart over the water's surface. Everything felt right, peaceful. I checked my map, adjusted my pack, and pressed on. The trail climbed higher, switchbacking up the side of a steep ridge. It was tough going, but I was making good time. By late afternoon, I'd found a good spot to set up camp. A small, flat area near the tree line with a perfect view of the valley below. As the sun set, I built a small fire and cooked a quick meal. The stars came out, brighter than I'd ever seen them, and the silence of the wilderness settled over me. I felt safe, comfortable. I fell asleep easily. The second day was harder. The trail became rougher, less maintained. I climbed over fallen trees, scrambled up rocky slopes. My legs ached, and the straps of my pack dug into my shoulders. By early afternoon, clouds started to gather. The temperature dropped, and a wind picked up. It wasn't in the forecast, but I wasn't too worried. I had a good tent, warm clothes, and plenty of supplies. I pushed on, hoping to reach a plateau marked on my map before stopping for the night. The trail was barely visible now, just a faint path through thick undergrowth. Felt different here. The trees were taller, their branches twisting overhead. The ground was soft, damp, covered in thick moss. It smelled different too, like rot, like something old. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. By the time I reached the plateau, the wind had turned into a steady howl. I found a spot somewhat sheltered by boulders and set up my tent. I was exhausted, sore, and starting to feel uneasy. Something about this place made my skin crawl, but I chalked it up to being alone and tired. I forced myself to eat, even though I wasn't hungry. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I listened to the wind outside. It didn't sound normal. It whistled and moaned through the trees, almost like voices. Then I heard something else, a low, distant thud. I told myself it was just a tree branch falling, but it came again and again, closer, a rhythmic, heavy sound, like something moving through the woods. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. Then silence. The wind, the noises, everything stopped. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, gripping my knife. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, the unease hadn't faded. I packed quickly, eager to put distance between myself and that place. But as I started down the trail, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Footprints. Not mine. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Large. Deep. Leading from the trees to where my tent had been. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but I knew better. I didn't waste time. I practically jogged down the trail, trying to stay calm, to keep my breathing steady. Every few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was alone, but I wasn't. About an hour later, I heard it again. The thud, the same rhythmic, heavy sound. This time, it was behind me, closer. I didn't stop. I picked up my pace, moving as fast as I could without running. The trees closed in, the trail winding through dense forest. Every sound made my pulse jump. Then I saw it. First, I thought it was just another tree, a thick, dark shape just off the trail. But then it moved. I didn't get a good look. I didn't want to. My body took over. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms and face. My pack slammed against my back. My lungs burned. The trail blurred beneath my feet. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath. Silence. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just the wind through the trees. I forced myself up, legs shaking, and kept moving. Slower now, but never stopping. I don't know how long it took, but eventually, the forest began to thin. I could see sunlight through the trees. Then the dirt road leading to the trailhead. Then my truck. I didn't stop until I was inside, doors locked, engine running. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, trying to slow my breathing. I looked back at the trail. Nothing. I don't know what I saw. I don't want to know. I haven't been back since, and I never will. The wind had been picking up for the past half hour, turning from a light breeze into a steady force that rustled through the trees. I had been hiking alone for most of the day, my backpack heavy with supplies, my boots kicking up dust from the dry, packed-down trail. I had planned this trip for months. 3 days alone in the backcountry, away from work, away from people, away from everything that had been gnawing at my mind. I needed this time, just me and the wilderness. But as I moved deeper into the forest, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. I didn't see anything strange. No eerie noises, no weird shadows. Just a feeling that settled in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I brushed it off as my nerves adjusting to solitude. I wasn't used to being alone in places like this, not really. I had done shorter hikes, but nothing this remote. I shook my head and pressed on, following the narrow trail as it wound through towering pine trees and thick underbrush. By late afternoon, I reached the place I had planned to set up camp. It was a small clearing beside a creek, tucked between the trees with just enough space for my tent. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the ground, so I got to work quickly. I set up my tent, gathered some wood, and got a small fire going. The crackling flames were comforting, cutting through the quiet that had settled over the forest like a blanket. I ate a simple meal, a dehydrated packet of beef stew, washing it down with cool creek water. The night was colder than I expected, and even with my fire, I found myself pulling my jacket tighter around my body. I tried to ignore how quiet it was. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, just the distant sound of the wind moving through the treetops. That night, I struggled to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt exposed, like something was watching me. I told myself it was paranoia, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I still zipped my sleeping bag all the way up and kept my knife close at hand. At some point, exhaustion won, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. A noise woke me in the middle of the night, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping under something heavy. My heart slammed against my ribs as I lay still, listening. Another snap, then silence. I strained my ears, trying to pick up any movement, but there was nothing. I didn't move for what felt like an hour, barely breathing. Eventually, sleep took me again, though it was restless and filled with strange dreams. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 30 feet from my tent, near the edge of the trees, the ground was disturbed. Fresh footprints in the soft dirt. Human footprints. Someone had been there in the night. They hadn't come close to my tent, but they had been watching from the tree line. My skin went cold as I stared at them, my mind racing. I told myself it could be a hunter, another hiker, maybe even a ranger, but I hadn't seen a single person since I started this hike. And why would someone be out here in the dead of night watching my camp? I felt exposed standing there in the open, so I quickly packed up my gear and doused the fire. I decided to push further into the forest, deeper into my route, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The day passed in tense silence. I kept looking over my shoulder, my nerves on edge. The footprints had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to focus on the trail, on the beauty around me, but my mind kept circling back to the same thought. Someone had been watching me, and they might still be. By late afternoon, I found another spot to set up camp, a small clearing beside a rocky outcrop. I didn't make a fire this time. I wanted to stay unnoticed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in my tent, listening. The wind had died down, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Every little sound made my muscles tense. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the sound of movement outside my tent. Not an animal. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for my knife. The footsteps stopped just outside. My breath was shallow as I gripped the handle, waiting. Minutes passed. Then, nothing. No retreating steps, no rustling of leaves. Just silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I emerged from my tent, scanning the area. Nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I had heard. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get out of this place. I packed up quickly and decided to cut my trip short. I had planned to be out here for 3 days, but I wasn't willing to spend another night. I moved fast, barely stopping to rest, my body fueled by adrenaline and fear. The trail stretched ahead, winding through dense trees, the undergrowth thick on either side. I was maybe 5 miles from my car when I saw it, something on the trail ahead. I slowed, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was a piece of cloth, torn and dirty, hanging from a low branch. My breath caught in my throat. It hadn't been there when I passed this way before. Someone had left it. A warning? A message? My fingers tightened around my knife as I forced myself forward, my eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. The next few miles were a blur. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to see someone step out from the trees, but I never did. I reached my car just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. I threw my gear in the back, my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced back at the tree line one last time. I didn't see anything, but I knew, deep down, that I had not been alone out there, and whoever had been watching me, they had let me leave. The morning air was crisp, the kind that stung the lungs in the best way, waking me up as I set out on the trail. I had planned this solo hike for weeks. Nothing too intense, just a long, quiet trek through a forested area in the mountains. I needed the time alone, away from work, people, and noise. The trail was supposed to be well-maintained, but remote enough that I wouldn't be bumping into other hikers every 10 minutes. It was exactly what I wanted. The first few miles were easy, mostly flat with gradual inclines. Birds called out from the branches, their songs echoing through the trees. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting moving patches of gold on the dirt path. The smell of pine and damp earth was thick in the air, and I let myself settle into the rhythm of my footsteps, my breathing, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I had mapped out a loop that would take me deeper into the forest before circling back to my starting point. It was a little over 12 miles in total, not too bad for a single day. I'd packed light, some food, extra layers, a first aid kit, and plenty of water. A few hours in, I reached the midpoint where the trail started to climb more steeply. The trees were denser here, the undergrowth thick and tangled. The trail itself had narrowed, and I had to watch my footing more carefully. It was around this time that I noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and even the wind had died down. It wasn't just quiet, it was silent. I kept moving, but something about the stillness made my skin crawl. I told myself it was nothing. The wind shifts, animals move on, there were a dozen logical explanations. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, but there was nothing, just trees. An hour passed, then another. The silence stayed. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I had no real reason to be. The trail was still clear, and I wasn't lost. I kept telling myself to focus, keep moving. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. I stopped in the middle of the trail, staring down. The dirt was packed, but not so hard that it wouldn't take an imprint. My own boot prints were easy to see, but these were different. They were barefoot, and they were fresh. My stomach dropped. I looked around, but there was no one. The trees stood still, their shadows stretching long across the ground. I crouched down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The prints were deep, like whoever left them had been running. They moved in the same direction I had been walking, disappearing into the trees ahead. I tried to shake off the nerves. Maybe someone had been out here before me, maybe they just lost their shoes. Maybe it was nothing. But the more I looked at them, the more I realized something was off. The stride was strange, longer than a normal step, almost as if the person had been loping forward on the balls of their feet. A horrible thought crossed my mind. What if they were still out here? I stood up fast, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. The silence pressed in on me, thick and heavy. I adjusted my pack and forced myself to keep walking. The faster I got back to the trailhead, the better. The footprints continued for a while before veering off into the underbrush. I didn't stop to look. I just kept going, my pace quickening. My heart was pounding now, every sound making me flinch. I told myself I was being stupid. I was tired, my mind playing tricks. Then I heard it, a rustling, not the wind, something moving. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It had come from my left, somewhere in the trees. I turned my head slowly, scanning the shadows. Nothing, just the dense thicket, unmoving. I started walking again, faster this time. The trail was narrowing even more, the trees pressing close. My legs ached, but I didn't slow down. The rustling came again, this time from behind me, closer. I spun around. Still nothing. I was done pretending this was nothing. Something or someone was out here, and they were following me. I picked up my pace to a near jog, my pulse hammering. The path was uneven, roots jutting out like traps, but I didn't care. I just needed to get back. The rustling stayed with me, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned sharply, my voice raw with fear. "Who's there?" Silence. The trees stood still. The sun had shifted, dipping lower in the sky. I could feel my own pulse in my ears. My hands clenched into fists. I didn't wait for an answer. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms, my legs. I wasn't even sure if I was still on the trail, but I didn't stop. The underbrush was thicker now, clawing at me as I pushed through. Then, suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I didn't even have time to yell before I was falling. I hit hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. Pain shot through my side. I gasped, struggling to sit up. I had fallen into some kind of ravine, the sides steep and lined with loose dirt. Above me, the trees swayed, dark against the sky, and then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the ravine, standing, watching. My blood turned to ice. The person, if it was a person, was barefoot, their feet inches from the loose dirt. Their face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see their posture. Still, unmoving, couldn't breathe. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just stared. Then they took a step forward. The dirt crumbled beneath their foot, and for a second, I thought they were going to fall in after me. But they didn't. They just stood there, staring down at me. I scrambled backward, my hands digging into the loose earth. My leg throbbed. I didn't care. I had to get out. I clawed my way up the ravine, dirt filling my nails, my body screaming in protest. When I reached the top, I didn't stop to look back. I just ran. I don't know how I made it back to my car. The last mile was a blur of pain and panic. When I finally saw the parking lot, my body nearly gave out. I locked myself inside, hands shaking as I started the engine. My ears rang with the silence of the forest, but I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I just drove. I never found out who or what was out there that day. I don't want to. I haven't been hiking alone since. The trail started off easy. A narrow dirt path, packed firm by years of footsteps, wound through the trees. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground in patches of light and shadow. The air smelled fresh, earthy, like damp leaves and pine. Birds chirped overhead, and a soft breeze rustled through the underbrush. It was peaceful. I had been looking forward to this hike for weeks. A solo trip, just me and the wilderness. I needed the time alone, away from work, from the noise of the city. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, nothing too extreme, but enough to feel comfortable alone in the woods. This trail was supposed to be challenging but not dangerous. I had checked the maps, packed plenty of food and water, and made sure someone knew my route. I was prepared. The first few miles were perfect. The trail was well marked, the terrain not too difficult. I kept a steady pace, stopping occasionally to take in the view. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The sounds of the forest shifted. Birds were less frequent. The rustling of leaves seemed further away. The wind picked up slightly, making the trees creak. After about 4 hours, I reached a split in the trail. One path continued along the ridge, following the original route I had planned. The other looked older, less traveled. It dipped down into a valley, the trees growing closer together. My map showed that it eventually reconnected to the main trail, just at a lower elevation. It would add some extra distance, but I wasn't in a hurry. The valley looked untouched, undisturbed. I decided to take it. As I descended, the air grew cooler. The thick canopy blocked out much of the sunlight. The ground was damp, covered in thick moss. I noticed that the usual forest sounds, birds, insects, had all but disappeared. The silence felt heavy, pressing in around me. The trail became rougher. Roots jutted from the ground, twisting underfoot. The further I went, the harder it was to follow. The path seemed to fade, blending into the forest floor. I checked my map again. It still showed a connection ahead. I kept going. About an hour passed, and I began to feel uneasy. The trail was almost non-existent now. The valley was deeper than I had expected. The trees taller, the underbrush thicker. I hadn't seen a single marker in a while. I considered turning back, but I hated the idea of retracing my steps uphill. I checked my compass and kept moving in the direction where the trail should be. Then I noticed something strange. The trees around me were different, older, their trunks massive, bark dark and scarred. Some had deep gashes, like something had clawed through them. Others had odd patterns cut into the wood. Not carvings, not natural marks, something else. I told myself I was overthinking it. Trees get damaged, animals scratch at them. But my gut told me something was off. I kept moving. The forest floor became soft, my boots sinking slightly with every step. The air was damp, heavy. My breathing felt louder. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. I tried to pick up my pace, but the ground slowed me down. My foot slipped on a patch of mud, and I went down hard. My knee slammed into a rock. Pain shot up my leg. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, shaking off the impact. When I looked up, I saw it. Ahead, in a small clearing, was something unnatural. Pile of bones. Not scattered, not the remains of a single animal, but a deliberate pile. Some were large, deer maybe, but others looked smaller. The bones were picked clean, no sign of decay or weathering. They hadn't been here long. My stomach turned. That was it. I needed to get out. I turned back, moving as fast as my knee would allow. But the forest looked different. The way I had come wasn't clear anymore. The trees seemed denser, the underbrush thicker. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I had a compass, I had a map. I could get back. I moved quickly, ignoring the pain in my leg. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. The trees around me felt closer, like the forest itself was shifting. I could hear my own breathing, the sound of my boots on the soft ground. Then something else, a sound. Not an animal, not the wind. It was distant at first, a soft rustling. Then closer, footsteps. I stopped, listened, nothing. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps followed. Not an echo, not mine. Someone, or something, was moving behind me. I didn't look back. I focused on my steps, keeping my breathing steady. My knee ached, but I pushed forward. I needed to find the trail again. The sound followed, never rushing, never getting too close, but always there. I pulled out my compass. My hands were shaking. I set my direction and kept moving. The trees blurred past. My pack felt heavier. The silence was worse now. It was unnatural, like the entire forest was waiting. Then, finally, a marker, a strip of orange tied to a tree. The trail. Relief hit me hard, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, faster, ignoring the sharp pain in my leg. The footsteps didn't follow this time. The silence lifted, and the usual sounds of the forest slowly returned. Birds, the rustling of leaves. Normal. I made it back to my car just as the sun was setting. I threw my pack into the trunk, locked the doors, and sat there, catching my breath. My knee throbbed. My hands were still shaking. I never looked back. I don't know what was in that valley. I don't want to know, but I won't be hiking alone again. The trail started out easy, dirt-packed and wide, winding gently through the trees. It felt almost too simple. I had been planning this solo hike for weeks. A full-day trek up into the mountains and back before dark. The forecast was clear. I had my pack loaded with water, food, a first aid kit, and a headlamp just in case. Everything felt right. The first few miles passed quickly. Birds chirped overhead. A light breeze rustled through the leaves, and the sun filtered through the branches, making speckled patterns on the ground. I was in my element, legs moving steady, lungs full of fresh air. The incline started to increase, but I welcomed the challenge. The quiet solitude was something I had missed, a break from the constant noise of everyday life. Just me, the trees, and the sound of my own footsteps. Around the 4th mile, the trail narrowed. It twisted sharply up the side of a steep ridge, the drop-off to my right growing steeper with every step. My legs burned, but I kept pushing forward, determined to reach the summit before noon. The further I climbed, the less maintained the trail seemed. The dirt turned to loose rocks, making footing tricky, and fallen branches crisscrossed the path. It was clear fewer hikers came this way. I reached a small clearing and took a break, drinking water and checking my map. According to it, I was still on the right trail, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The forest was too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died. Even my own breath seemed muted. I brushed it off as paranoia and continued on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The trail became even rougher. Overgrown bushes snagged at my clothes, the ground uneven beneath my boots. I started noticing small things that didn't sit right. Deep scratches on tree trunks, too high up to be from an animal. Rocks stacked neatly in odd formations along the path. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, faded and frayed. I told myself it was probably just remnants from other hikers, maybe some kind of marker system, but my gut told me otherwise. Then I found the boot print. It was fresh. Not just any boot print, but a deep, well-defined one, like someone had just passed through. The problem? The dirt around it was undisturbed. No other prints leading to or from it. It was as if someone had stood there, perfectly still, then vanished. I crouched down, heart pounding, and examined it closer. It was bigger than my own boot print, the tread worn down in places. Someone else had been here recently. I stood up, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sound. But that feeling of being watched grew stronger. I swallowed my nerves and pressed on, moving faster now. My plan was to hit the summit and turn back as quickly as possible. About a mile later, I stumbled onto something that made my stomach drop. A campsite, or at least what had been one. A small fire pit sat in the center, long since cold, surrounded by scattered belongings. A torn sleeping bag, an old backpack with the zipper partially open, its contents spilling out, socks, an empty water bottle, a moldy granola bar. But the worst part was the tent. It was slashed open from top to bottom, like something had ripped through the fabric. I looked around, expecting, hoping, to see some sign of the person who had camped here. But the site was abandoned. It wasn't just that they had left, it was the way everything looked like they had left in a hurry, like they had run. I felt exposed, standing there. I had no reason to stay, so I turned back the way I came. I wasn't even thinking about reaching the summit anymore. I just wanted to get off the mountain before dark. But as I retraced my steps, something was wrong. The trail didn't look the same. I knew I had followed the same path up, but things were different. Trees that I swore I had passed before were missing. Small landmarks I had mentally noted were nowhere to be seen. It was like the trail was shifting beneath my feet. I walked faster. Then I heard it, a twig snapping behind me. I froze, my ears strained, heart hammering. Silence. Then another snap, closer this time. I turned, scanning the woods, but there was nothing there. At least nothing I could see. I started moving again. Faster now, my legs almost running down the steep terrain. The footsteps followed. Not constant, but enough to let me know they were there. Something or someone was pacing me, staying just far enough back to remain hidden. Then I saw the boot print again. The same one. Same exact shape, same deep impression in the dirt. Like I had never left that spot. Panic clawed up my throat. I wasn't lost. I knew I wasn't. I had followed the same path down, but somehow I was going in circles. My brain scrambled for logic, for reason, but none of it made sense. I forced myself to keep moving, ignoring the growing feeling of dread twisting my stomach. Then, up ahead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another campsite, the same one. I stumbled to a stop, my breath coming in sharp gasps. It wasn't possible. I had been walking downhill the entire time. There was no way I had looped back. But there it was, the same fire pit, the same torn sleeping bag, the same slashed tent. Only this time, there was something inside the tent. A shape, still, motionless. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then, slowly, the shape shifted. I turned and bolted. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. The footsteps behind me erupted into a full sprint. They weren't trying to stay hidden anymore. Whoever, whatever it was, they were chasing me now. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My only focus was getting out. My pack bounced against my back. Branches tore at my arms. But I didn't stop. The trail blurred beneath my feet, my breath ragged. The sound of pursuit stayed right behind me, never gaining, never falling back. Then suddenly the trees broke open. I stumbled out onto the main trail, nearly collapsing from the momentum. The parking lot was just ahead. My car. Safety. The footsteps behind me stopped. I turned, chest heaving, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the empty trail, stretching back into the darkening woods. I didn't wait. I ran to my car, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine, tires kicking up gravel as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my mind racing. I don't know what happened up there. I don't know who or what was in that tent. I don't know why the trail kept leading me back. But I do know one thing. I'll never go back. I don't know why I decided to hike alone. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. Whatever the reason, I packed my gear, checked the weather, and drove out to a remote trail in the mountains. The place wasn't exactly popular, which was part of the appeal. I wasn't looking for a crowded, family-friendly walk. I wanted something quiet, something that would push me just enough to feel like I accomplished something. The trail was about 15 miles total, 7 out and 7 back, winding through dense forest, crossing a couple of streams, and gaining a decent amount of elevation before reaching a high ridge with an open view. I got a late start. By the time I arrived at the trailhead, it was almost noon. The sun was high, but the trees were thick enough to keep the air cool. I slung my pack over my shoulders, checked that I had everything: water, food, first aid kit, knife, flashlight, and started walking. The first few miles were uneventful. The forest was quiet except for the usual sounds: birds, rustling leaves, the occasional squirrel darting through the underbrush. The trail was well-worn but empty. I hadn't seen another car at the small gravel parking area, which meant I was probably the only one out here today. That was fine. I had planned for that. Around mile 5, I started feeling uneasy. Not scared exactly, just off. It was subtle at first, like that feeling you get when you think someone is watching you, but you know no one's there. I kept walking, brushing it off. Maybe I was just spooking myself since I wasn't used to hiking alone. But then I noticed something strange. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind. Even my own footsteps felt muffled, like the trees were absorbing the sound. I stopped and listened. Nothing, just dead, heavy silence. I shook it off and kept going. I was close to the halfway point. If I turned back now, I'd feel like an idiot later. Still, I picked up my pace. I didn't like the quiet. It was unnatural. When I reached the ridge, I felt a small sense of relief. The trees thinned out, opening to a rocky outcrop with a clear view of the valley below. I sat down, drank some water, and ate a protein bar. The silence still hung over everything, but the openness of the ridge made me feel a little better. The sun was still high. I told myself I was being ridiculous, just nerves. After a short rest, I started heading back. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They hadn't been there when I came up. They weren't mine, too big, too deep, and they were fresh. I stopped, my stomach twisting. Someone had come up the trail after me, but I hadn't heard anyone. I hadn't seen anyone. I turned and looked back toward the ridge. No one was there. I looked ahead down the trail. The prints continued in my direction. I wasn't alone. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't about to panic over footprints. Maybe I had just been distracted and missed someone coming up while I was sitting at the ridge. Maybe they had taken a different route back. I didn't know, but I wasn't taking any chances. I picked up my pace, moving quickly but carefully. I kept my head on a swivel, listening for any sound of movement. The forest stayed silent. Then, at mile 10, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Pile of rocks. Small, stacked deliberately in the middle of the trail. That hadn't been there before. I slowed down, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just thick forest on both sides of the narrow trail. I kept moving. A few minutes later, I saw another pile. Then another. All spaced evenly along the trail. Someone was marking something, or leading me somewhere. I wanted to run. My body was screaming at me to run. But running blind through the forest was a good way to get hurt or lost. And I still hadn't seen anyone. No voices, no movement, just these silent signs that someone was out here with me. I kept moving, fast but controlled. My knife was in my pocket, and I pulled it out, keeping it in my hand. I had no idea if it would do any good, but it made me feel a little less helpless. Then, just when I thought I was in the clear, I smelled it. Rot. Something dead. The stench hit me so suddenly I gagged. It was thick, cloying, worse than anything I had smelled before. I covered my nose and kept walking, but the smell only got stronger. Then I saw it. A deer, or what was left of one. Its body was torn open, ribs sticking out like jagged teeth. The head was gone. The meat was fresh, dark, and wet. Something had killed it recently. I stumbled back, eyes scanning the trees. Was it a predator? A bear? A cougar? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I took off, fast but careful. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. The last 3 miles were a blur. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to feel breath on my neck, to see something burst from the trees. But nothing happened. Just the silence, the awful, suffocating silence. When I saw my car, I almost cried. I ran the last 100 yards, threw my pack in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I struggled to get the keys in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. I never found out who or what was out there. I don't want to know. had been planning the hike for weeks, studying the maps, checking the weather, and making sure I had everything I needed. The trail was deep in the mountains, miles away from any towns or cell service. It wasn't a popular hike, which was exactly why I chose it. I wanted solitude, a chance to clear my head. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, but this one was different. Felt bigger, riskier, but I was confident. I had the experience, the gear, and the time. The drive to the trailhead was long. The last hour was on a dirt road that twisted up through the trees, my tires kicking up dust behind me. I passed a couple of old hunting cabins, their windows boarded up. Finally, I reached the small parking area, empty except for an old, rusted truck that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. I checked my pack, locked my car, and started walking. The first few miles were peaceful. The trail was well marked but clearly not well traveled. The ground was packed dirt with scattered rocks and roots, and the trees were thick on both sides. It was quiet, just the sound of my boots and the occasional bird or squirrel rustling in the underbrush. I took my time, enjoying the fresh air and the scent of pine. The sun was high, filtering through the leaves in patches of gold. It felt good to be out there, away from everything. After a couple of hours, the trail got steeper. My legs burned, but I liked the challenge. I stopped to drink some water, looking out over the valley below. The view was incredible. Rolling hills, endless trees, a river cutting through the land like a silver ribbon. No sign of people, no houses, no roads, just wilderness. Exactly what I wanted. But as I stood there, something felt off. I couldn't explain it. The air was still, too still. The birds had gone quiet. I listened, expecting to hear wind in the trees, maybe the distant rush of the river, but there was nothing, just silence. It made my skin crawl. I shook it off, blaming it on my own mind, and kept moving. The trail leveled out for a while, winding through dense forest. The trees were taller here, their trunks wide and gnarled. I had the sudden thought that they had been here long before me and would be here long after I was gone. It was unsettling. I picked up my pace. Then I saw it. A boot print, fresh, right in the middle of the trail. It wasn't mine. It was bigger, wider. Someone else was out here. That shouldn't have been strange. This was public land, after all. But I hadn't seen another car at the trailhead, just that old truck, and there were no intersecting trails for miles. I crouched down, examining the print. The edges were sharp, not softened by wind or rain. Someone had walked this trail recently, maybe within the hour. I stood up and looked around. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I kept going, but now I was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the trees. I told myself it was fine. Maybe it was a hunter scouting the area. Maybe someone had parked farther up an old logging road. There were plenty of logical explanations, but my gut told me something was wrong. An hour later, I reached the clearing where I planned to set up camp. It was a small meadow surrounded by trees, with a stream nearby for water. I dropped my pack and stretched my shoulders. I had made good time. The sun was still up, though it was lower now, casting long shadows across the grass. I set up my tent quickly, my fingers working from muscle memory. Then I gathered some wood for a fire. I wasn't worried about bears. This wasn't bear country. But I still kept my food sealed tight and away from my sleeping area. I had done this enough times to know the routine. As the fire crackled, I ate a simple meal of jerky and nuts, washing it down with water. The unease from earlier hadn't gone away. I kept glancing into the trees, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing. Just darkness creeping in as the sun sank lower. Then I heard it. A snap. A branch breaking. Close. I froze, listening. Another snap. My eyes darted to the trees. Nothing. The firelight only reached so far, leaving the rest of the forest in darkness. My breath came slow and steady, but my heart pounded. I reached for my knife, gripping it tight. Silence. Then footsteps. Not an animal. Too heavy, too deliberate. Someone was out there. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees. My fire crackled, the only sound. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Hello, I called out, my voice steady. No answer. Then movement. A shadow shifting just beyond the fire's glow. I couldn't see a shape, just something there, watching. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. Nothing. Just empty woods. But I knew what I heard. I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going, sitting with my back to my tent, my knife in my lap. I listened. I waited. The footsteps never came back, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The first light, I packed up fast. I didn't eat, didn't take my time. I just wanted to get out. As I shouldered my pack, I glanced around one last time. Then I saw it. Another boot print. Closer this time, right at the edge of my campsite. I turned and walked, fast but steady, forcing myself not to run. My mind raced. Had someone been watching me all night? Why hadn't they done anything? Or had they? Had they just been waiting? I made it back to the trail, moving quickly. I didn't stop, didn't take breaks. The sun was up now, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The whole way back, I felt that weight on my back, that unseen presence. I never saw anyone, but I knew they were there. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors the second I got in. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. That old truck was still there, untouched. I stared at it, wondering. Then I started the engine and left. I didn't look back. I haven't been back to that trail since. I don't plan to, and I don't hike alone anymore.